I was barely back on the ranch 5 minutes before someone tried to kick me off it. I hadn't even taken my boots off. See? My grandfather left me this 30-acre stretch of land out in Oak Hollow, a quiet, sun-bleached town where tumbleweeds still roll and people pretend they're in a Hallmark movie. After he passed, the land sat mostly unused while I bounced between jobs and deployments. But when I finally came home for good, I figured it was time to restore the place, fix the fencing, rebuild the barn, maybe even run a few cows like Grandpa used to. Real legacy stuff. What I didn't expect was to be told I didn't belong. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I was hauling lumber out of my truck when a white Range Rover pulled up. Out popped a woman in heels, way too pointy for gravel, clutching a clipboard like it was a sword of justice. "Excuse me," she called out, squinting. "Are you with the maintenance crew?" I turned slowly. "Nope, I own this place." She blinked. "You own the ranch?" "That's right. Inherited it. Got the papers to prove it." She glanced down at the clipboard, then at the old barn behind me, as if trying to calculate the square footage of her mistake. "Then we need to talk. I'm Cynthia, president of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association." Didn't shake her hand. She gave me a tight-lipped smile. "We've had some complaints about this property. Debris, unregistered structures, livestock proximity." "There's no livestock yet," I replied. "And the debris? That's lumber for rebuilding." Well, either way, this land technically falls within HOA jurisdiction after the boundary rezoning last year. It's considered shared green space now. I laughed. Out loud. "Ma'am, this land's been in my family since before your HOA existed. You don't have a claim." She didn't flinch. "We're asking you to vacate within 30 days while the board conducts an environmental review." "Yeah, that's not happening." Her smile dropped. "If you don't comply, we'll issue a formal violation and request legal removal. You wouldn't want to start off on the wrong foot with your neighbors, would you?" I looked around. Nearest neighbor? At least 600 yards away, across a dry creek and a row of wind-battered pecan trees. Then I looked back at Cynthia. "Lady, I've got a stronger claim to this dirt than your HOA's got to reality. You might want to fact-check before coming at me with a clipboard and bad intentions." She sniffed. "You'll be hearing from us." I watched her drive off, tires kicking up dust, and for the first time since setting foot back on the ranch, I realized something. This wasn't going to be about fences or barn paint. It was war. Later that day, I dug out the deed from my safe. Thick paper, embossed seal, signed and recorded back in 1964. Then I drove into town and pulled every public record I could find. Turns out, a year ago, the HOA had petitioned the county to redraw their community borders. Why? So they could claim jurisdiction over a few key properties they thought were underdeveloped and underutilized. Translation: vacant land they could pretty up and control. My ranch was one of them, but here's the kicker. They had no legal authority to do so unless the property owners opted in. And I sure as hell hadn't. They assumed I wasn't around, that the land was unclaimed, that nobody would challenge them. Classic HOA overreach. The next day, I started getting letters, nicely typed, on HOA letterhead. Notice of violation, unauthorized structure, failure to submit landscape plan for review, trespassing on HOA Greenbelt property. That last one almost made me spit out my coffee. Trespassing on my own ranch. They even taped one to the barn door, like they thought this was a sheriff's standoff in an old western. By Friday, I'd had enough. I decided to walk over to the little HOA building they used as their office. It sat right near the edge of the development, a squat prefab with a row of sad bushes and a flag that hadn't been taken down since Memorial Day. When I stepped inside, the receptionist looked up and frowned. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm here to speak with whoever decided to claim my ranch as community property." The woman disappeared for a moment, and out walked Cynthia again, clipboard in hand, smug as ever. "This isn't the place for dramatic confrontations," she said. "This is the place where you rent space," I replied. "I looked it up. You're leasing this office from me." That wiped a smile off her face. "You're mistaken," she said, too quickly. "Nope," I said, pulling out the county tax roll printout. "Lot 14B, still in my family's name. Leased to Oak Hollow Neighborhood Association under a 5-year renewable contract, set to expire next month." Her face went pale. "Oh, and one more thing," I added. "That parking lot out front? That's on my parcel, too." I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "If you want me off my own land, you might want to vacate yours first." If you've never seen a person go from smug to stunned in under 3 seconds, I highly recommend dropping a lease expiration notice on an HOA president. Cynthia's face turned 3 shades of offended. She stood there gripping her clipboard like it was a holy relic, and I had just wiped my boots on it. "That's not possible," she sputtered. "This building is part of the Oak Hollow Administrative Complex. We've had this office for over a decade." "Yup," I said, calm as a cow at sunrise. "Because my grandfather rented it to you for $1,200.00 a year. He liked helping the neighborhood. Thought it kept people off his back. Guess he was wrong." She scrambled to recover. "You can't just revoke a community lease out of spite." "Ooh, I'm not revoking it. I'm renewing it with some updated terms." I handed her the new lease agreement. The look on her face when she saw the bolded line, $2,400.00 per month, due upon signature, was the kind of look I'd frame above the fireplace if I could. "This is extortion," she hissed. "This is inflation," I said, "and market rate. I even included a friends and family discount, but feel free to decline. I'll just reclaim the space." She glanced at the parking lot. "What about the public right-of-way?" "Also mine. Parcel 14B includes the lot, the sidewalk, and that little patch of grass where y'all put up a no parking except HOA sign." I swear she wobbled like a cartoon character about to faint, but instead she clutched her pearls, quite literally, and said, "I'll have our legal team review this." "Great," I replied. "Make sure they check the clause about back pay. You've been underpaying for years." I turned and walked out, whistling. Not out of smugness, but strategy. Because Cynthia had just played her hand too soon, and I had the ace. By Monday, I got not 1, but 3 certified letters from the HOA's attorney. I expected cease and desist demands, and I got them, but they came with a twist. One was a full-blown eviction notice. They were trying to claim I was illegally occupying land recently annexed into the Oak Hollow Community Development. They still hadn't gotten the memo. The second was a threat to sue me for interfering with HOA operations. The third, a demand to cease intimidation and extortionate financial demands under the guise of revised lease agreements. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my sunflower seeds. So I called up the only lawyer I trust, Lance, an old Army buddy turned real estate litigation expert. He read the letters over Zoom, sipped his energy drink, and said, "These people are dumber than a bag of wet bricks." He walked me through the game plan: file a cease and desist of our own against the HOA for harassment, submit the county land plats as evidence of ownership, and serve them with an eviction notice for failing to renew the lease. Oh, and he told me to start keeping a log of all HOA communication. Paper trail beats tantrums, he said. Every time. So that's what I did. Meanwhile, the HOA began ramping up their pressure tactics. HOA officers started patrolling my fence line. One day, I caught two guys with measuring wheels trying to verify boundary compliance. Another time, they left a bright orange sticker on my barn that read, "Notice of non-compliance. Structure in violation of HOA." It was a barn on a ranch built in the 1970s. They might as well have ticketed a cactus for not matching the neighborhood palette. The final straw? They had someone place a community garbage bin right at the entrance to my private driveway, which sounds innocent, until the wind picked up and scattered bags of fast food wrappers, diapers, and God knows what else across my property. I didn't yell. I didn't escalate. I just took photos, called animal control for the open trash, filed a complaint with the city sanitation board, and printed everything for my file folder titled Ailment, Dumb Stuff, Vault 1. At the same time, Lance sent them a counteroffer. The new lease would still allow them to stay in their little prefab office. If they agreed to the new rate, removed all HOA claims on my land, publicly acknowledged my exemption from their community, and paid the first 2 months up front. They had 30 days to respond. At first, silence, then panic, because on day 12, I received an urgent call from a new HOA board member named Jared. Younger guy, probably roped into the madness out of civic guilt. He sounded frazzled. "Look, Mr. Harper," he began, "we didn't realize the office space was leased from you. We thought it was community land." "Well," I said, "now you know." He paused. "We're hoping we can work something out that doesn't involve, kicking us out or doubling the rent." I told him I was open to it, but only if they stopped harassing me and started acknowledging who owned what. Then came the kicker. He let something slip. "Oh, sorry. Cynthia never even brought up the lease expiration to the board. She just assumed it auto-renewed." Classic HOA move. Assume first, power trip later. I smiled and said, "Tell you what, I'll give you folks until the deadline, but come day 31, I start charging late fees." Because this wasn't just about rent. This was about respect. And if they wanted to act like I didn't own the land, well, they were about to learn what it meant to owe the landowner. The deadline came faster than a prairie storm. 30 days. That was generous, especially for a bunch of folks who'd tried to evict me from my own land. But I gave them every chance. Printed lease, legal backing, even a PDF with payment instructions. Clear, direct, adult. You know what I got in return? A bake sale. I kid you not, on the very day rent was due, the HOA threw a bake sale in the parking lot of my property. Posters, balloons, cookies with "Support Oak Hollow" written in blue icing. And not one word about the lease. It was surreal watching families gather, kids running around with frosting on their noses, while Cynthia stood near the punch bowl like a suburban Marie Antoinette, completely ignoring the eviction-shaped elephant in the room. Didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Because the very next morning at 9 a.m. I filed the formal notice of termination of leasehold tenancy with the county, complete with notarized receipts and delivery confirmation. By noon, I posted 2 big signs outside the HOA office and parking lot. Meeting terminated. Opposite us. Of 1201. I Bobby Eccles, subject to towering undercounty, June 48th through 90. Then I made a few calls. One to my cousin Wyatt, who owns a fencing company, and one to my friend Anna, who works in parking enforcement. By Friday, the HOA's tidy little office had a shiny new perimeter of chain link fence and a fresh coat of red paint on the curb. No parking, private property. I stood across the street, arms crossed, as Cynthia arrived. She stared at the signs, the fence, the tow truck idling nearby like a hawk, and then, slowly, at me. "You're out of control," she muttered. "No," I said. "I'm in control, for the first time since you stepped on my land pretending you owned it. People need this space," she snapped. "You're disrupting a whole community over what, some pride?" "Nope," I replied. "Over rent, which you didn't pay. Over legal boundaries, which you didn't respect. Over reality, which you keep trying to rewrite with Sharpie, and HOA letterhead." She stormed off, but not before yelling something about retaliation and civil litigation. Classic. That afternoon, the board sent out a mass email calling me a non-cooperative stakeholder and encouraging residents to boycott unauthorized landowners. Unauthorized, on my own ranch. But they could spin it however they wanted, because now they were boxed in, literally, without access to their parking lot. Meetings were chaos. Members had to park 2 streets over and walk in the heat. Deliveries got missed. One of the board's computers overheated because no one remembered to reset the A/C timer. Meanwhile, I kept records. Every car that ignored the signs, photographed, logged. Every community meeting held on my land without permission, videoed. By week 3, I'd served the HOA with trespass notices for their staff and contractors. The county sheriff signed off. No drama, just paperwork. Then I made my next move. I offered to lease the parking lot only, for triple the original office rate. It wasn't about greed, it was about making a point. Respect isn't free. They declined, of course. Cynthia said it was outrageous. Said they'd find alternative accommodations, but by then, the cracks were showing. Emails started leaking. Apparently half the board had no idea they were ever on my land to begin with. One guy, Jared, admitted in a group thread, "Why are we poking this bear? He literally owns the barn and the server closet." But the moment that sealed it, the HOA treasurer, an older gentleman named Bob, called me himself. Said he'd been on the board since it was formed. Said he never agreed to this mess. Said, "Look, I just want to keep the lights on and the water running. Can we meet halfway?" I respected that, so I offered a revised deal. They could stay in the office for the new rate, $2,400.00/month. No discounts. Month to month only. No renewal without my sign-off. And parking, still extra. Bob asked, "And if we say no?" Durham smiled. "Then bring sunscreen. You'll be holding meetings in folding chairs under a pecan tree." By the end of the week, the board voted 5-2 to accept the deal. Cynthia, she was one of the 2. She quit the next day. I heard she moved to a gated community across town with a stricter HOA and deed restrictions on mailbox height. Fitting. As for me, I unlocked the parking lot gate, repainted the curbs, sent the first official invoice through my new LLC. Harbor Holdings and Land Management, a name with teeth, because now they didn't just have to acknowledge I was the owner. They had to pay me for the privilege. Funny thing about people, they'll forgive anything, unless you mess with their parking. It didn't matter that I'd legally reclaimed my land, that the HOA had trespassed, that Cynthia had played dictator on dirt she didn't own. None of that mattered to the yoga moms and lawn dads of Oak Hollow when they couldn't find a place to park within 300 feet of their precious HOA clubhouse. Where am I supposed to put my car? One guy yelled as I installed the final section of fencing around the parking lot. I looked at him over my sunglasses. You see that patch of gravel next to the cul-de-sac? That's HOA property. Exactly. Ask them. Because this time, I wasn't just defending my ranch, I was exposing the illusion. The HOA had built its little empire by acting like everything belonged to them. But now, with each chain link panel I bolted down, the illusion crumbled. They had to ask permission now. It took less than a week for the chaos to begin. Residents started showing up late to board meetings, then stopped coming altogether. Deliveries backed up. HOA maintenance trucks were forced to park on the side of the road, causing traffic complaints from neighboring communities. I heard someone even called the local news. That's when the cherry on top arrived. A notice from the county fire marshal. Apparently, HOA staff had started parking in fire lanes to avoid the blocked lot. Huge violation. They were fined $2,000, 0 cents. Guess whose name was on the complaint? Yep, mine. It was never about revenge. Okay, maybe a little, but mostly about boundaries, literal and figurative. I didn't gloat. I just watched as the HOA tried, desperately, to pretend like they still had control. They moved their monthly meetings to a nearby elementary school cafeteria. But people kept missing the new location. Agendas were skipped, votes delayed, the wheels were falling off. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. Well, except for the part where I built a raised garden bed where the HOA's community session box used to be, beautiful little patch of soil and basil. It had a sign, private property, trespassers will be composted. One afternoon, as I was trimming the rosemary, I saw Jared again, the younger board member who had originally tried to play mediator. He walked up slowly, holding something behind his back. Peace offering, he said, pulling out a 6-pack of locally brewed IPA. You bribing me? Trying to save my sanity. As we sat on the porch and talked, he told me Cynthia had burned more bridges than a pyromaniac architect. Most of the board just wanted to manage trash pickup and lawn care, not declare war on the landowner with the deed. You'd be surprised how many people didn't even know the HOA leased this office, he admitted. People don't read fine print, I said. That's why it's always in your favor, if you do. He asked if I'd consider dropping the rent if the board issued a public apology. I laughed. Not mean-spirited, just amused. This isn't about the rent, Jared. It's about who gets to write the rules. You tried to evict me. I offered a chance to fix it. Instead, I got bake sales and trespassers. He nodded. Fair. Then he said something that surprised me. Would you ever consider being on the board? I nearly dropped my beer. You want me to join the HOA? Honestly, we need someone who actually understands the community's legal map and doesn't tolerate BS. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. The next morning, I received something unexpected, an envelope with the HOA seal, hand-delivered to my door. Inside was a letter signed by 5 board members, a formal apology for the overreach, a vote to remove Cynthia as president, retroactively, and a request to renew the lease officially under my terms. I took a walk around the property that evening. The sun was setting over the ridge, casting long shadows across the gravel. I passed the barn, the pasture, the parking lot, and finally stood in front of the clubhouse. It looked small now, less like a fortress, more like what it was, a temporary guest on permanent land. I pulled out my phone and drafted a reply. Lease approved, terms accepted, but let's be clear, you don't own this ranch. You rent a piece of it, Because I allow it. That's not power, that's grace. Don't mistake the two again. I didn't just win, I rewrote the script. By the time spring rolled around, the HOA office was humming quietly under a brand new lease with my LLC stamped at the bottom of every page. Rent came in automatically on the first of each month, $2,400, 0 cents wired directly into my business account. Every time I saw the deposit notification, I smiled, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. A community finally acknowledging the land beneath their feet. They even paid a separate parking fee, $600, 0 cents a month, for the newly unblocked lot. I painted fresh lines and installed solar-powered lights. Funny how quickly people learn respect when their sedans risk getting towed. And the best part? It was all perfectly legal, ironclad, filed, notarized, and recorded with the county. But if you thought this story ended with a quiet handshake and fresh mulch, think again. Because 2 weeks after the lease was finalized, I got a call from a familiar number. "Cynthia, I just want to say," she started, voice icy, "that what you did was hostile and unnecessary." I let the silence sit for a moment. "You tried to evict me from my own property. You could have been reasonable. You taped a violation sticker on my barn and tried to build a gazebo over my septic tank." She hung up. And just like that, I got closure. Well, almost. Because something wild happened next. The Oak Hollow community, now free from Cynthia's regime, started warming up to me. The same folks who once believed I was squatting on undeveloped HOA space were now waving when they passed by, dropping off fresh eggs, or asking if they could tour the ranch with their kids. One neighbor, Linda, even asked if she could host her daughter's wedding reception in my pasture. At first, I hesitated. Then I remembered my grandpa's words. Land only matters if you use it to bring people together. So I said yes. We cleaned up the barn, strung fairy lights along the old fence posts, and set out bales of hay as seats. It was beautiful, real, and for the first time in years, the ranch felt alive again. After the wedding, Jared pulled me aside. "You ever think about putting up a historical marker?" I raised an eyebrow. "This land's been in your family for almost a century. The whole town's history runs through here. Might be nice to get it recognized permanently." That stuck with me. So I applied, pulled out every dusty photo, every land deed, every story Grandpa told me while we fixed the tractor or painted fence posts. A few months later, I got the call. Approved. Now at the entrance to the ranch, there's a bronze plaque that reads, "Harper Ranch, S. 1927. A legacy of land, family, and standing your ground." I can't tell you how good it feels to drive past that sign every morning. But I can tell you what I've learned. HOA boards aren't evil. But power without accountability? That's dangerous. Legal land boundaries are more sacred than opinions. Never underestimate a guy with a deed, a lawyer, and a lot of free time. Bose? And one final detail. Remember the community suggestion box that disappeared when I put up my garden? I replaced it. The new one. Only this time, it sits at the ranch fence line, wood-carved, sturdy, and with a little sign above it. Suggestions. Welcome, just don't overstep. Thanks for sticking with me, y'all. If you've ever had to fight to defend what's yours, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your HOA horror story in the comments. Trust me, you're not alone.